Another person who got literally canceled was Bill Maher's politically incorrect. And it wasn't because he offended the snowflakes by being racist or homophobic, or when he compared mentally disabled people to dogs, or the numerous times he said it's totally cool for a female teacher to f*** their 14-year-old male students, or any number of his other terrible, lazy, scumbag opinions he espouses on his long-running, not-canceled show currently on HBO. No, politically incorrect got canceled because Maher implied the United States was cowardly for launching missiles from 1,000 miles away. And then the White House press secretary used his government position to condemn private citizen Maher and sponsored pulled because he insulted the troops and then he got canceled. So maybe the real snowflakes are our government and military. So here's some more news. Bill Maher, try a whole lot harder, please. Or failing that, shut the fudge up a little bit, please. But let's back up, all right? Let's start at the beginning, which for us is, here's some old news. Remember more than several weeks ago when Bill Maher went on that new rule rant about fat shaming, and a bunch of people online got upset about it, and other people like Piers Morgan were like, yeah, right on. Great company, Bill. And that was that. Well, I wanted to respond to Maher about his new rule, not because I was offended or feeling a bit too PC, but because he was wrong and lazy through the entire thing about everything he said. But then professional songmobile James Corden did a whole thing about it.
So I'm sat at home and I'm watching this, and all I could think, I was watching it, I was like, oh man, somebody needs to say something about this. If only there was someone with a platform who knew what it was actually like to be overweight. And then I realized, oh, that'll be me.
While he does point out that Maher is just sort of generally wrong about the effects of fat shaming, the piece doesn't really go in depth into why, and it largely comes from a more personal and emotional place, which is totally valid, and it plays a huge part in why fat shaming doesn't work. But Bill was so wrong in so many ways, and I just wanted to explain why, but it had already been addressed. Maybe Bill would respond to that, who knows? Other stuff is going on. Who needs another video about Bill Maher? But then weeks passed, and it became more and more clear that this is kind of his entire approach to everything. And he just keeps saying things that are wrong without listening to the people, even though he's supposedly interested in the marketplace of ideas. And then, the day before we shot this, he was like,
autism issue, they certainly have studied it a million times, including out of this country.
Yes.
No, I don't trust this country so much because of paychecks. I mean, for writing checks to people. But they've just, they say it, and yet there's all these parents who say, I had a normal child, got the vaccine. This story keeps coming over. It seems to me more realistic to me, if we're just going to be realistic about it, like, it probably happens so rarely. But no one, you can't say it happens 1 in a million times, because then somebody will think, well, it could be that millionth one.
This anecdotal vaccine concern, it's just, this video isn't about vaccines and how there's no evidence that they cause autism, which you said out loud, or how anecdotal evidence isn't strong evidence, which, you know, or this video isn't about vaccines. But Bill, since you're definitely watching this, and thanks for that, like and subscribe, I'll just leave this topic with our new segment, This Is Who You Sound Like.
Just the other day, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, a child, a beautiful child, went to have the vaccine and came back, and a week later got a tremendous fever, got very, very sick, now is autistic.
But anyway, this isn't about vaccines. It's about everything else Bill Maher says, and it's kind of about Ellen and like cancel culture and healthcare and rich people disease. And I don't know, we'll get to that. We'll figure it out together. But first, the fat shaming stuff.
A new rule at next Thursday's debate, one of the candidates has to say, the problem with our healthcare system is Americans eat shit and too much of it.
Now right off the bat, that's a weird claim. One of the problems with America's health is the food we eat. It's not a problem with the healthcare system. You can say it's a burden on the healthcare system if you have to, but using that and diverting the conversation away from the wacky notion that maybe in the richest country in the modern world where people literally eat gold, people should be able to go to a doctor and maybe even call an ambulance to literally save your life without having to pay $1,000. It's like saying, hey, why do we guarantee everyone a lawyer when they're criminals and stuff? Not that everybody gets a lawyer, but you get my point. Anyway, obesity isn't a problem with how currently one's ability to see a doctor is tied to their individual employment, as opposed to their individual existence in a good society that people would want to be in. You know how much insulin costs versus how much it needs to cost, Bill? You can go to the hospital and have a baby, and they will charge your baby, Bill. Anyway.
All the candidates will talk about their health plans, but no one will mention the key factor. The citizens don't lift a finger to help.
So from here on out, it seems like Bill has asserted that the problem with our healthcare system is the sick people and the ways in which they behave. Now, obviously individual behavior affects your health, but that doesn't mean that because you don't exercise or do drink alcohol, you shouldn't be able to see a doctor. And
then the candidates will go back on the trail the next day and try to prove they're just as big a gluttonous slob as the rest of us. Sometimes while discussing pre-existing conditions. But why do people have so many pre-existing conditions? Being fat isn't a birth defect. Nobody comes out of the womb needing to buy 2 seats on the airplane.
There he is implying that the only pre-existing conditions are caused by obesity, and that ain't true. He then says being fat isn't a pre-existing condition or birth defect. Now, Bill, nobody's saying it's a birth defect, or that all pre-existing conditions are birth defects. Also, there is a genetic component to obesity, and even if there wasn't, what's your proposal here, Bill? We're not doing universal health care until America gets a little more trim? You can't go to the doctor if your cancer is from smoking cigarettes? What's the BMI target for not going to the doctor, Bill? What's your policy there? Because some doctors actually don't take new patients over a certain weight, which probably doesn't help them lose weight or deal with a health problem that doesn't have to do with their weight. Or hey, maybe it does. I hope they can go to a doctor who can help them instead of being ineffectively shamed, Bill. This is just exclusionary elitist dog shit that doesn't even make any sense. Are we going to find all the bad things that lead to your pre-existing condition and decide which ones make you worthy or not? That's the whole thing about pre-existing conditions. You're not excluded. Heart disease and cancer are the leading causes of death in America, but the next is accidents. You want to police whose accidents are up to snuff? Also, heart disease and cancer are the leading causes of death in America if you're over 45. If you're under 45, it's accidents. The main cause of death is f***ing being old and diseased and dying, Bill. Everyone does it. It's okay if we all decide to help each other through that. Even if you're upset that some people eat too many f***ing ding-dongs. But anyway, speaking of ding-dongs, Bill then gets into the real topic here, food. And he introduces the one and only article he based this entire piece on that I'm pretty sure he definitely didn't read.
Here it is in a nutshell from the New York Times. Poor diet is the leading cause of mortality in the United States.
This article that Bill quote-unquote read in a nutshell is that Americans are eating terrible food and they're eating it too much. Also, we're wasting lots of food, and that seems bad and stupid for lots of reasons, and we're wasting a lot of food on feeding our food, and that's not the point. All right. This article, to quote Bill in a nutshell, is true. And obesity causes health issues, as we've discussed, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and so on. It's not the only cause of those things, but it's a cause. And as we all know from Bill, whether or not the richest country on a planet full of countries that takes care of their citizens' health care can pay for your health care is based on the cause of the health problems. But anyway.
We scream at Congress to find a way to pay for our medical bills, but it wouldn't be nearly the issue it is if people just didn't eat like assholes.
Now again, aside from the fact that Bill seems to keep weirdly implying that our healthcare system is not the, or a, problem that should be fixed, he's also saying, don't demand anything of your government because we're all eating like crap. And this is super interesting to me because aside from the fact that the government does lots of stuff despite the behavior of individuals, because it seems like Bill doesn't know that we have a Department of Agriculture and a Food and Drug Administration, government entities that have some control over the food we eat and how it's produced. We live in a society, Bill. Often eating junk food is cheaper than eating healthy. Many poor areas have food deserts, which makes it more difficult to eat better. Taking the time to exercise. It's not like everybody is rich, Bill. It's not like everybody's done interviews talking about how hard it is to eat right and exercise, and now you finally make healthy food and have a personal trainer that you see regularly. I wonder why the millionaire finally has an easy time staying healthy and an even easier time shitting on people who don't.
What's Elizabeth Warren's plan for that?
Maybe relevant, maybe not, but Bill got real rich and hates taxes now and is currently complaining about free college and free healthcare all the time, and I don't wonder why. Anyway, I guess my point here, more of which we'll get to, is that ludicrous amounts of money seems to have some bad side effects in regards to how the government works, not you, Bill. And there are powerful industries and lobbies that influence the government. Like, Bill is saying the healthcare system isn't the problem. It's actually the food people eat. And people just take responsibility and stop eating so poorly. But much like climate change, the real causes, the real change, doesn't come from individuals. It comes from much larger and complex systems and like corporations and stuff. Bill mentions diabetes without mentioning the unnecessarily and grotesquely high price of insulin many people have to ration. Another element of the rise in diabetes is the sugar lobby's effort to demonize fat and say sugar is good. We'll actually get more to that in a minute. Bill.
The Amazon fires are because farmers there are burning down the rainforest to make room for future hamburgers and soybeans.
This is true. The Amazon rainforest is on fire on purpose to make room for cattle and stuff. Now, this aspect of it actually has nothing to do with America specifically, since most of America's beef is from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Mexico. Also, there's a lot one could go into in regards to the meat industry. And also, yeah, Bill, this thing you mentioned that isn't about fat shaming people is also bad. Anyway.
We weren't always like this. Watching the footage of the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, I was struck by how not fat everyone in the crowd was. We looked like a completely different race of people.
Now, this is especially interesting because if you look into the rise of obesity, like if you just Google it, just type the words and spend a few minutes on the topic, you'd learn so much very quickly. Simple things like that in the 60s, nearly half the jobs in the private sector required at least moderate physical activity. In 2010, less than 20% demanded the same amount of work. Our jobs, the things people need in order to get health care, are contributing to the problem. We drive everywhere and walk less than other countries. Obviously, that's not the only factor, and it doesn't excuse people from not being active, but it's relevant and adds a lot of nuance and context to Bill's excuse to shit on fat people. This could have helped to inform his bad point, is my point. And it was easily obtained and directly relates to Bill's complaint about one photo of people in the 60s specifically. Also in the 60s specifically, the sugar lobby worked to demonize fat and secretly fund scientific research to frame sugar as really, really good, in reaction to an overflow of legitimate research coming from elsewhere. In the specific decade that Bill was wondering about.
Some years ago, when they were trying to find the genesis of heart disease, there were two considerations, sugar and fat.
Right.
And they paid off Harvard Medical School professors, 50 grand, to lay the blame at the feet of fat.
This whole thing, and Bill's way of thinking, which I promise we'll get more to, it's so lazy. In fact, this is so lazy and needlessly contrarian with little thought but LOL, f you fatties. He complains about fat acceptance in this video. And if Bill Maher had taken this amount of time to Google the words fat acceptance movement, he'd quickly find out that the fat acceptance movement started in the 60s. Bill, that could have been a point to bring up for your argument. Not a great one, because of all the other stuff I've been saying, but one. Anyway, the sugar lobby is also responsible for keeping the percentage of daily sugar requirements off of nutrition labels. You'll notice, on all of your labels, it only shows the grams, the grammage, not how much you should have per day. It's the only one. Anyway, several years ago, it was decided to add the percentage of daily sugar to labels, because all of our shit has too much sugar in it. And this, after being decided several years ago, is hopefully happening in 2020. And also, it's only showing the percentage of artificial sugar. So, regardless, pointless tangent, sorry. The sugar lobby's push to put sugar in everything we eat has nothing to do with Bill Maher's thoughtful rant about how people with diabetes can go eat shit. End of his bad points. There's more. This will never end. Okay.
Can fat be beautiful? That's in the eye of the beholder. But healthy? No. That's science.
and we'll get back to that. But now, here.
We shouldn't taunt people about it. And overeating shouldn't be singled out as the only vice. It's not. We all have something. But there's no smoking acceptance or drunk acceptance.
Now, I understand the point he's trying to make. But we've also already discussed how nobody reasonable would argue against single-payer health care because people die from smoking. You probably wouldn't argue that you can't get that cancer treatment you need because you smoked. You dead f***. But also, overeating is an addiction, and when you compare it to smoking or alcohol, which are also addictive, you're forgetting that human beings, and in fact organisms in general, do not require smoking tobacco to live. This analogy would only work if people needed to drink alcohol to survive, and then you tell an alcoholic, okay, drinking too much is bad for you, but you still need to drink a little bit of alcohol every day or you'll die. The analogy just rings really hollow. And speaking of terrible analogies...
Hey, liberals, you know how you hate it when conservatives won't even let the CDC study gun violence as a public health issue? This is that. You're the NRA of mayonnaise.
And then, of course, we get back to the real point.
Fat shaming doesn't need to end. It needs to make a comeback.
But here's the problem, Bill. It's not anything like the CDC not being allowed to study gun violence, because people do study obesity and health. Studies show that fat shaming does not work. It actually hurts and makes it more difficult for people to lose weight, which is already hard for people to do and to keep off. Doctors are much more hostile to fat patients, less helpful, and some even actively don't accept patients over 200 pounds. All things I've already mentioned. So when you say,
that's science,
maybe you could put in a tiny bit of effort beyond that article you didn't read, because that one article you put on the screen in order to make your wrong point was written by both a former Secretary of Agriculture and an expert on nutrition science, and it weirdly didn't mention fat shaming. Probably because of the studies they'd read on the topic of fat shaming. The article, most of this article, gives many solutions and policies that can help solve this problem. Paragraphs of solutions. Here they are on the screen. And here's an arrow pointing at the fat shaming part. Aside from that part about fat shaming with an arrow pointing to it, there's just like a bunch of government and industry policies to help the population. So in regards to this CDC comparison, what you're doing, Bill, who thanks for subscribing, is more like if the CDC was allowed to study gun violence, and they came to conclusions, and they suggested a bunch of solutions that don't include kicking people while shouting, "Stop shooting people, asshole," at them. And then you go on your show and say, look at this article about our gun violence problem. We need to bring back kicking people and shouting, "Stop shooting people, asshole," at them. Anyway, anything else, Bill?
People know I'm speaking the truth.
Right on. So here's what I really wanted to talk about. Everybody thinks their opinions are correct. That's what opinions are. But Bill also often talks about how, people laugh at offensive jokes because they know it's true.
And also because when people laugh, they know it's true.
That's what laughter is. If you laugh, it means it's true. If you don't laugh, it means
I'm speaking the truth.
Bill thinks he's a truth-telling sage, no matter what, telling you the hard truths, the politically incorrect, nasty shit that you don't want to know. And he's often very wrong. And sometimes that's kind of dangerous. Like with the vaccine anecdote about the person he may have known, which I guess we are going to talk about, because apparently Bill Maher's always talked about this. To quote this 2015 article's headline from sciencebasedmedicine.org, he's still an anti-vaccine crank after all these years. So much so that he notably tries not to bring it up while talking to a scientist, but his audience and guests already know that he's been an anti-vaccine crank for years, so...
So don't be all too high and mighty there, because there's certain aspects of science denial that are squarely in the liberal left.
Like?
Oh, really? You want to have that conversation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I know one, but I don't want to get into it.
Okay, fine.
Here's him a decade ago, talking to former Senate Majority Leader and physician Bill Frist about swine flu vaccines.
2 weeks ago, a 30-year-old came into my hospital, perfectly healthy, dead of the swine flu. If he'd had the vaccine, if the vaccine were available, he'd be alive.
That's an anecdotal story. That's not typical. This is not a very serious flu.
Yeah, that anecdotal evidence of yours is bunk, I tell you. Good point, Bill. Anyway, do we also have a clip of Maher mentioning something about the terrible food we all put into our bodies to justify his vaccine skepticism and not say why Americans are so unhealthy?
We didn't used to have all this corn syrup in our bodies, antibiotics. It could be any combination. So I'm a little cautious.
Cool. Anyway, I'm not just going to talk about all the ways in which Bill Maher is wrong about vaccines, or how, to prove his point, he quoted Jonas Salk about live vaccines, and Bill Frist was like, when's that quote from? The 50s? Live vaccines are for things like chickenpox, measles, mumps, you know, those diseases people get more of in communities where kids aren't vaccinated. And it's just kind of irresponsible to have on this anti-vaxxer and spout anecdotal evidence to support it. But again, I'm not here to just be like, Bill is wrong about X or Y, or like do a rundown of all the stuff he's wrong about that I think is bad. I could. He once, in a serious manner, said that people who raise mentally disabled children are exactly like him having a dog, which is easy. He's pretty Islamophobic, and not just because he's anti-religion, like he really doesn't like Muslims specifically, and not in a, there's extremism these days kind of way, but in like a, that specific religion is specifically bad and there's something fundamentally wrong with it, despite, much like the vaccine thing, not listening to people who talk to him about it.
It's not us that changed, it's Islam that changed. And that in my lifetime, this culture has really changed. If you look back to, when I was 10 or 11, like half a century ago, these cities, Beirut, Damascus, Tehran, Baghdad, these were famous open cities. Beirut was called the Paris of the East.
Despite absorbing information about the region from just decades ago, or hopefully being aware of things like the Golden Age of Islam, he'll just boil it all down to what he really thinks.
They bring that desert stuff.
Oh, okay. But again, I'm not here to just list off his wrong, gross shit. But again, okay, one more. And to really get into it, we need to talk about
Milo Yiannopoulos.
Milo is a complete fraud who believes in nothing. His goal was to piss people off by saying outlandish things that are also true, but also, I'm just joking. You take everything so seriously, but also feminism is cancer and so on. If you were duped by Milo after listening to him talk for 5 seconds, you need to have a long think. Much like if you associate with Prager University, you shouldn't be taken seriously. If you associated with Milo or lifted him up in any way, same. But Bill loved Milo. Sure, they disagreed on some things, but he sure does trigger the SJWs. He sure is politically incorrect. He sure is a champion of free speech. And I'm not gonna really show clips of this interview because Milo is really boring and also a blatant liar. He lied throughout it, coyly. And as Maher notes in the interview, he was employed by Steve Bannon and was actually paid by Bannon and billionaires to sneak white nationalism into the zeitgeist. That was his goal. So let's get that man on TV. But anyway, about a day after Milo was on Maher's show, Milo's career took a bit of a turn. It was the beginning of the end for him because of video surfacing in which Milo discusses his belief that men, specifically clergymen, molesting young boys is sort of a good and necessary relationship for the gay experience, a coming-of-age sort of thing. And again, no need to show the clip, but after this happened, Bill Maher discussed Milo's downfall, taking credit for it, claiming, then we had Milo on, despite the fact that many people said, oh, how dare you give a platform to this man? What I think people saw was an emotionally needy Ann Coulter wannabe trying to make a buck off of the left's propensity for outrage. And by the end of the weekend, by dinner time Monday, he's dropped as a speaker at CPAC. Then he's dropped by Breitbart, and his book deal falls through. As I say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You're welcome. Do we have a clip or two of disinfectant?
Stop taking the bait, liberals. The fact that they all freaked out
Wasn't it
about this
pathetic?
little impish British you have the potential to morph. I mean, you remind me like of a young, gay, alive Christopher Hitchens.
Ann Coulter wannabe, young gay Christopher Hitchens, you know, whatever. Just basking in the sunlight. You did it, Bill. You took him down. Hell yeah. Wait, also, don't you hate cancel culture, but you're praising yourself for getting Milo canceled? All right, we'll get into that actually later. Interesting that the thing that took Milo down, which Bill Maher is praising himself for, was about adults having sex with young boys. Something Bill Maher thinks is fine, too.
Mary Kay Letourneau, the teacher from Seattle, who is in jail because she is in love. That's how I view it. I admit that it's unorthodox. She is 35, the boy is 14.
That's him on Politically Incorrect in 1998, saying adult male teacher sex with child bad, adult female teacher sex with child good, because he wanted to fuck his teachers and stuff. It's a lazy scumbag opinion that he shares with Milo, as well as himself years later, as he discusses in this Playboy interview. It's especially interesting because, much like all of his awful opinions based on nothing, he was explained why that's actually f***ed up, Bill, very eloquently and succinctly in 1998 by Henry Rollins.
How can a woman rape a man?
I think that an older woman can manipulate a young kid, and I don't think it's really healthy. I don't think it's healthy for a kid who's going to be 14 with 2 kids out in the world. I think those children will grow up fairly damaged. I think that kid's going to grow up fairly damaged.
So you're on her side?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, correct. But Bill just shrugs, well, I'll still have this opinion in 10 years or whatever. He's a marketplace of ideas man, but he doesn't actually care about it. He's not open to it. He's like a dumber, more alive Christopher Hitchens, who was so stubborn that he didn't think waterboarding was torture until he was waterboarded for 17 seconds. But Bill just really likes being in the politically incorrect club, regardless of how actually incorrect he is. It's why he'll have on Steve Bannon and gush over him, because...
And I know that, you had a little event there at the New Yorker. They had a festival. In fact, I want to read Malcolm Gladwell's quote, because they were going to interview you, and then you were disinvited. I've been disinvited many times, by the way. It's a good club.
Yes, what a cool club to be in. The right-wing nationalist propagandist club. And Bill knows who Bannon is. He hates Donald Trump and thinks he's a fascist. He thinks fascism is on the rise. He's worried Donald Trump won't even leave office. Yet...
But I'm going to say to you what I always say to conservatives when they come here. First of all, thank you. I appreciate it, and it says volumes why the Republicans are in power and we have none.
So I guess what I mean to say is, this concludes our only installment of our new segment. It's weird to praise a person you know is a fascist propagandist for taking the opportunity to speak to a wide audience on a prestigious media network. Bill doesn't even take Bannon's advice about the thing he knows about, the information he desperately wanted to know about what Democrat could beat Donald Trump.
I want the answer to this. Who scares you?
If Bernie Sanders had an ounce of Avenatti's fearlessness, he would have been the Democratic nominee, and we would have had a much tougher time. And if Bernie had had the type of fight and fearlessness that Trump had, he would have won the Democratic primary, and then we would have had left-wing populism and right-wing populism fight it out in 2016.
But as we've discussed, Bill no like eat the taxes. But what's my point? What am I even talking about? He's just a guy with terrible opinions and bad guests on an enormous platform. But all the things we've been talking about, they're indicative of some pitfalls we see a lot from rich liberals in the Trump era. The left got a little too PC, so I changed all of my opinions about the economy, social issues, systemic racism, healthcare, and history. I'm not saying Bill embodies all of that, but he falls for it very easily. His need to be anti-PC leads him to embracing and validating weirdos and liars and reactionaries like Milo, or the uncivil civility wanter and my good friend Ben Shapiro, or people with reactionary views who work for right-wing think tanks that were literally started to combat the liberal consensus of the 60s that arose from researching things and coming to conclusions. These people start with a conclusion or bad opinion and go look for any bit of evidence to support it. It happens all the time on Prager University, according to their own website, not an accredited university, and professional censorship victims who aren't being censored and who are funded by homophobic fossil fuel billionaires for the purposes of lying. They lie constantly, all the time. I won't even bother going through any of them. There are so many videos pointing out their countless lies. Links in the description. My God, they are such liars all the time, and it's all run by Dennis Prager. Seen here on Bill Maher's show like a couple of days ago. There he is, lying. Not even going to give the audio. Just look at that liar. You can't even look at him in the eyes. Just a liar, talking about how America is the least racist country in the world. My point is, Dennis Prager and a lot of the lying reactionary frauds Bill has on his show, giving credibility to them because they're anti-PC and safe space too. Well, all these people are the types of people who would be like, I think fat shaming is good, and raising taxes for universal health care is bad. So here's this article I found where the headline says the food we eat is bad. Point proven. Thanks for watching PragerU. And a lot of it is just meant to protect capital and the status quo. He wants to go back to the way things were before Trump because he doesn't understand why Trump is the president. Sure, there's the racism and misogyny and a lot of factors, but Trump, despite literally living in a tower of gold, was presented as a populist, an outsider, anti-establishment, because people are fed up with austerity and massive wealth inequality. Productivity is up, but wages are stagnant. There's food insecurity, the healthcare thing, and just generally all the things that are wrong while people are literally eating gold. But Bill thinks it's PC culture. He's been complaining about political correctness for his entire career on TV for millions of dollars. But he says we got Trump because of PC culture and comic books, and not stuff like asshole millionaires ripping into red states about how that big sea of red feels like their invitation got lost in the mail, and they still use the mail. Weird dunk on people who have to use the useful service, the post office, Bill. Bill adds,
We have Chef Wolfgang Puck. They have Chef Boyardee.
You got 'em, Bill. F*** those people. And they're bad food for them that they have to eat. You know about the food thing. Hey, Bill, you know what else bum places you despise, full of people you despise, have? Let's take, what's a place? Lima, Ohio. Bunch of slack-jawed cereal box readers if they read at all, right? They also don't get an ambulance bill because they pay for it with their taxes. Huh. Anyway, again, what's the point of this? Cancel Bill Maher? I don't know, sure? Bill loves to complain about cancel culture. It's a great club to be in, right, buddy? But we have a whole other episode about cancel culture in general and how it doesn't really exist. But what it's really talking about is how cancel culture doesn't exist for the powerful people who complain about it all the time. When they complain about it, it's often them saying something while saying they are not allowed to say it, while making lots of money saying it. They're often complaining about criticism or mean tweets. Like when Ellen was criticized for palling around with an anti-gay marriage war criminal who expanded our surveillance state and didn't close Guantanamo Bay. No, not that one. That one. Well, Ellen went on her massive platform to liken war criminal George W. Bush, who paid no consequences for anything, to friends of hers who wear fur. See, it's a disagreement among friends, because what she's doing here is the bad kind of class solidarity. She would never have Trump on her show, despite buying him a literal golden baby stroller earlier. But George W. Bush, he's just someone she disagrees with. In her defense, she says this.
But a lot of people were mad, and they did what people do when they're mad. They tweet.
Now, aside from the fact that she also shares a nice tweet to prove that Twitter is good, lack of consequences for the powerful makes people feel powerless. And social media, with its many flaws, lets them communicate that, sometimes directly to powerful, out-of-touch millionaires like her, or Bill Maher. And then when people make a satire video of her speech juxtaposed with the torture stuff, well, the millionaire gets it taken down, cancels it. And this kind of is it's just frustrating. Recently, Hillary Clinton and her daughter were on The Daily Show, and Trevor Noah took this opportunity to ask about her relationship with Jeff Epstein. Bold! Wow! Speaking truth to power. Except,
Hillary, I have to ask you a question that has been plaguing me for a while. How did you kill Jeffrey Epstein? Because you're not in power, but you have all the power.
The infuriating thing that you just watched is a fun little bit that the rich and powerful people are having fun with. But it actually functions as obfuscating the very real connections Epstein had with her husband and countless wealthy, powerful people who wanted nothing more than for him to go away. They were on the show to promote their book about gutsy women, so maybe like a better question would be about the many young girls who were trafficked and abused by Jeff Epstein, a man who famously had a plane called the Lolita Express and which Bill Clinton rode so many times. Jeff Epstein, whose assistant, partner, sex trafficking helper attended Chelsea Clinton's wedding after it was already publicly known that Epstein was a pedophile, and so on. So what would you say to those girls as gutsy women who had those powerful relationships and the knowledge of who he was and what he was doing? But instead, it's this fun little joke that they can laugh at and erase all of that. I'm off the rails again. Bill Maher, cancel culture, or in this case, criticism and mean tweets. When we hear about cancel culture from people like Maher, who was weirdly proud about canceling Milo, they don't say anything about how we live in a punitive society, and as a whole, we sort of embrace that, and social media makes it even worse, and there's a restorative approach available to situations, and there's a nuanced conversation. And some normal people have literally lost their jobs in a society where healthcare is tied to employment, and harassment and doxing can lead to suicide, and all that stuff. But no, to Bill, and the people who complain about it on stage or in the New York Times are talking about something else, and using it as a weapon and a shield from criticism. To them, cancel culture has nothing to do with people actually affected by it. It's actually about,
you're a great sport, you have a great sense of humor, unlike the social justice warriors who are going to be out there tweeting that all the jokes are problematic. You people can blow me, you pussy sticks.
People booed me at my comedy. Bill Maher doesn't really speak truth to power because he likes where he's sitting. It's comfortable. He's got that personal trainer now. He's speaking truth to Maher. He can point out years ago, when Obamacare was being passed, that it's a Republican bill, and that a real left healthcare bill would actually be single payer.
The whole thing is a Republican idea. It's the old Bob Dole plan from the 90s. A Democrat idea would be at least a public option. But really, a liberal idea would be a single payer plan.
But nowadays, when single payer is actually a viable option and on the table,
I'm looking hard at Amy Klobuchar.
Man of the people. Interesting thing about that interview with fascist propagandist Dinesh D'Souza, it wasn't his first. When he was on Politically Incorrect, Dinesh and Maher were discussing how the 9/11 terrorists weren't cowards because they killed themselves, a hard thing to do. Maher took it further and said the real cowards are us, who send missiles from thousands of miles away. And what happened after that is that Bill Maher got canceled. Ari Fleischer, the spokesperson for the president of the country at the time, went in front of the nation and in regards to Bill's comments said it's a reminder to all Americans that they need to watch what they say, watch what they do. This is not a time for remarks like that. There never is. And then he was canceled. Not by the PC police, not by sensitive college kids, by the government. Complains about PC culture for decades, canceled by the government for insulting the military, not for the pro-teachers f***ing their underage students stuff. Anyway, again, what's the point here? Bill Maher, please try harder? Listen to people who aren't liars in regards to your wrong opinions? Stop having propagandists on your show just to bond over the SJW stuff? Cancel Bill Maher? Don't cancel Bill Maher? Let's talk to our good friend Bill Maher, who's Politically Incorrect was once literally canceled from television, though I'm going to guess he's actually doing fine now, via one of his recent famously well-researched segments. In the segment, Bill Maher, who hates cancel culture but also took credit for the canceling of Milo Yiannopoulos for some reason, once again talks about cancel culture and brings it just a butthole hairs away from really getting to a point. He brings up that this isn't about celebrities and millionaires getting criticized or losing jobs only to get other jobs and staying millionaires. It's not about Republican grievances. It's about
cancel culture is real, it's insane, and it's growing exponentially, and it's coming to a neighborhood near you. If you think it's just for celebrities, no.
Bill mentions, in like a fucking sentence, that this isn't about celebrities being canceled or Republicans, it's about ordinary people getting fired from their jobs for misunderstandings. And after that one line, he talks for the entire rest of the segment for 5 minutes about
Justin Timberlake, Britney Spears, Pebbles, The Mandalorian's Gina Carano, Chris Harrison's turn in the barrel.
Celebrities. He's still fucking talking about people criticizing celebrities or writing them off. Because he doesn't like criticism. Because he's a celebrity. He gives a little morsel of real people are affected by this, and then just complains about people making comments about Justin Timberlake. Instead of citing one example about the OK symbol that paints the entire left as some illogical woke mob, he could have mentioned other people on the left and the right who have lost their jobs, and like, what could be done beyond his thesis, which is don't apologize for things. There's a whole website of canceled people who've lost their jobs, if you're into that. Interesting to note about that site, many of the examples aren't people who were dogpiled or that the woke mob demanded to be fired. It's people fired for transgressions of values by their bosses internally. Maybe a good opportunity to talk about at-will employment and how maybe it should be harder to fire people for like whatever fucking reason. Maybe a good opportunity to talk about how we tie healthcare to employment. So losing your job is actually a health concern. Could talk about the negative mental health effects of online bullying. Or he could talk about criticism of Justin Timberlake. That's fun too, I guess. Side note, at one point, Bill gives a made-up example of a transgression.
Someone had a Confederate flag in their dorm room in 1990 and you didn't do anything?
Because he just likes making up scenarios to get mad at. But it weirdly mirrors this speech from George H.W. Bush in 1991, complaining about political correctness. One example was, quote, at Harvard, 2 students who hung a Confederate flag out a dormitory window were denounced by black students. Seems really fucking reasonable, Bill. Tale as old as time. As depressing as the land before time. He follows it up with this.
You laughed at a Woody Allen movie?
A complaint nobody actually has, and if they do, they'd probably get bullied online for it. I don't even know what I'm saying at this point. I guess cancel culture isn't real, it's not a thing, it's a meaningless term, but it's also technically real in other ways that the people who complain about cancel culture don't care about. And if we could retire the term and the vague bullshit concept, that would be great, while also furthering the conversation about what our values are, how we as a society enforce those values, or reject those values, or interact with people in that same society who don't share those values, how we achieve accountability, how we determine consequences, how maybe if the solution is fire the person, we should also be a society which effectively houses and feeds people and provides health care, regardless of employment. First news story, go! Oh yeah, Batman v Superman, that's what all the kids are talking about. So earlier last month, the nation's wealthiest people finally felt comfortable enough amid the swelling number of COVID deaths to throw themselves a neat little costume party. The Met Gala, an annual fundraising event for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was held on September 13th, signifying the end of the pandemic and a welcome return to normalcy. I was invited, but I didn't go. You're welcome. Also, it says here the pandemic is not over. Not over at all, in fact. Interesting. But look, those fancy dresses weren't going to buy themselves, you joyless ogres, you f***ing serfs! Bow to your Susian quilt lord and his shadow queen! The prom night for rich people understandably drew its fair share of critics, including noted keymaster of shitty opinions Bill Maher. On an episode of Real Time, the current incarnation of his long-running panel show until he inevitably claims the 9/11 hijackers created Harry Potter or some shit and it gets canceled again, Maher pointed out the questionable optics of having the glamorous Hollywood elite attend an ostentatious ball in the second year of a global pandemic and strike maskless poses alongside masked event staff, especially when that staff is expected to do things like carry Kelly Cuoco's dress train like a mouse who got turned into a butler by her fairy godmother. Now, I'm literally sacrificing 14 months of my life to the abyss to say this, but that specific statement is actually a good point by Bill Maher. The Met Gala is, on many levels, pretty much the last thing we needed right now. But what wasn't a good point was what Maher had to say about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the representative of New York's 14th District, who attended the event wearing a dress with the phrase "tax the rich" stenciled across the back like something out of the smash hit film Cruella, a movie about a stylish dog assassin. Maher, who never misses an opportunity to say something so obtuse that it somehow transcends stupidity like an idiot Siddhartha, took AOC's wardrobe statement to task on a recent episode of Real Time.
This is something that, the Met Gala attracts lots of crazy outfits, but this is a new thing that people have been doing. They've been wearing, I guess, their message, their life philosophy, tax the rich. I just want to read I had some sets here. Oh, New York City, 65,000, the richest 65,000 New Yorkers out of 8 million people pay 51% of taxes.
And what proportion is that?
I'm just saying, 65,000 out of 8 million pay half.
And their taxes
so
are
it's
still
not like
too
we
low.
don't tax the rich at all.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, cool shrug after totally missing the point of something, Bill. This, I guess, point he's making is about as stable as a drunk circus bear, with a Gordon Gekko haircut on his first day on the unicycle. Not a stable bear is his point. It's the same intellectually dishonest gotcha thinking behind saying all lives matter as a response to Black Lives Matter. Playground semantics used in the final throes of a dying argument. Because she's not saying we don't tax the rich at all, Bill. Obviously, that's not what she means. She's saying they need to pay more. You know? Because maybe it's a bad thing that the wealthiest people in the history of the world pay roughly the same, if not fewer taxes, as a shift worker struggling to afford rent and healthcare, if they pay any at all. Because I don't know if you know this, but that's a tad bit of a problem in America, Bill. He does know that. He has just always not wanted to pay taxes. Also, remember when the last guy, cut taxes? Did you like that or him? And it's clear that Billiam understands all of this, because after this moment, we get to watch him sadly deflate like an unwanted boner in real time. Hence the name of his show.
There are lots of things we need to amend about the capitalist system. We have crony capitalism in this country. No doubt about it. I'm just saying, you wear tax the rich on your ass. And people are always saying, rich don't pay taxes. They pay some taxes. They pay a big part of the freight already. I'm not saying it shouldn't be more, perhaps, but let's not lie.
Hey, Bill, weird how you mocked AOC's message and then ended up endorsing it by the end of the segment, which actually is pretty darn emblematic of Maher as a political commentator. Sometimes, most times, Bill likes to sort of dance around a controversial point while ultimately not saying much of anything, vaguely contradict in that smug devil's advocate way that no one likes before ultimately just agreeing or standing down after tiring everyone out. It's just so very clear he doesn't even completely believe what he's saying, but HBO pays him millions of dollars a year to be a performative contrarian who, say, criticizes Obamacare for not being literally single payer, and when he has Bernie Sanders on, criticize him for wanting to pay for healthcare with taxes, and also casually mentions how all we need to do is raise taxes so people's babies don't die. So, what are you gonna do? Not watch his show is what you should do. In case that wasn't clear. Or do. I don't know. I'm not your boss. I'm just your news dad. Bill is, of course, just one of many gotcha ghouls trying to deflect AOC's message by muddling it with accusations of hypocrisy, like lying and saying that she bought a ticket to the gala, or this New York Post article correctly pointing out that the dress's designer actually has a history of not paying taxes, as if that somehow negates the message instead of reinforces it. Because none of this should conclude that AOC is perfect either, or not also part of a game of clapbacks and publicity stunts. And perhaps even this idea of raising awareness of taxing the rich isn't needed so much as actually pushing legislation to tax the rich more, which in fairness AOC does try to do. But ultimately, this act of wearing a dress at a fancy celebrity ball doesn't really do much of anything but feed people like Bill Maher, and the cycle just keeps going until we all run out of water. I mean, not all of us, just the poor. Also,
I think it's incredibly important because when we talk about supporting working families and when we talk about having a fair tax code, oftentimes this conversation is happening among working and middle class people amongst themselves. And I think it's time that we bring all classes into the conversation.
Bring all classes into the conversation, you say? Really, you said? You don't think maybe there's one class of people who, has been at the table long enough? Like, maybe class collaboration isn't the best solution to class conflict when the conflict is coming from the top, and bringing all classes to the table is a way to sort of dilute what needs to be done. Like, maybe if all classes are present, maybe there's one that will sort of, take over the conversation so it's not actually fair. Anyway, I don't know. I guess who gives a shit or whatever. And so let's just stop talking about it. Boom. Story one done. Dramatic stuff. Keep it moving. It's hard to get anyone excited about US news when it's just a blanketing flow of hypocrisy mixed with a terrifying lack of accountability. You got your Proud Boys and GOP drumming up this election hogwash and the minimal efforts to prevent another January 6th, stuff that truly should make your skin crawl happening in Texas, drone strikes against kids, and open lies from the military. And what people mainly wanted to talk about was AOC's dress and demonizing sex work. Real threats being completely ignored, while fake threats get that weird Bill Maher outrage. Everyone bogged down with superficial battles so the real sinister shit can happen without us realizing. Like two superheroes tricked into fighting each other while the actual villain sneaks by in some movie I just made up that I don't think exists. Here's what I do know. I know that the majority of Americans think abortion should remain legal and disapprove of what the Supreme Court did. I know that our views of sex work, particularly thanks to the young people, have grown far more positive over the years. That we want to tax the rich more, and that most Americans accepted the reality that Biden won the election. But like this recall election, we're constantly forced to stop, confirm the obvious, and hope the stragglers will catch up. So yeah, there's some frustrating stuff here, but not all of it is a sad ending. And it's a good case to make for why we can't look away from this, why we'll keep updating you for better or for worse. Because, you know, we're pointed in the right direction, maybe. Except for the drone stuff. We love drones for some reason. But hey, that other stuff, so like, stay vigilant, but not in like a vigilante way, and involved. Vote in those goofball recall elections, no matter how much monkey and or cheetah business seems to be involved. Call your representatives and tell them how much of your farts the Texas abortion ban can eat. Ideally, all of them. All of the farts. Tell them to tax the motherfucking rich, but be sure to clarify more in case Bill Maher is listening. And you know, in general, just stay vigilant for Bill Maher. He's gonna show up like the Babadook sometimes. It's terrifying. So keep your head on a swivel. And so now, for any right-leaning chuckle dealer from the States, you either have to be Adam Carolla, triggering the libs with the villain from a Rodney Dangerfield movie, and risk losing your entire moral compass, or I guess like become a lefty, because there's no room for non-culture war, non-hateful conservative comedians. And probably the closest thing to an actual successful conservative comic right now is Bill Maher. And boy, that should upset everyone to hear me say out loud. Including Bill Maher. And honestly, that must suck. Like, I feel bad. See, the final thing here, and I guess this is conjecture, is that Republicans are way less fractured than Democrats. What I mean is that the GOP tends to put importance on towing the line. You saw that a lot with Trump, who initially was met with a lot of pushback from the GOP until, yeah. Republican policies are traditionally about limiting things like regulations or spending. Again, traditionally. Where Democrats are built on inclusivity and progressiveness and like a huge jumble of policies, too many policies and ideals and so on. You could argue that might be a problem they have, especially if they don't really believe it and don't really try to do it. But the good part is that this creates a bigger tent for a wider variety of people. It creates more push and pull for ideas, which ultimately makes it easier for comedy. So I guess my conclusion is that conservatives, if they really want to get funnier, need to like spread out or loosen a bit. Loosen up? Cucks? You know what might be affecting the job market? The fact that a large portion of Gen Z are seeking out jobs designed to battle the climate crisis. Because literally, what's the point in pursuing any other future? While we millennials are busy yelling at boomers for polluting the environment and ruining the housing market and such, these young shits are trying to ensure that they even exist when they're our age. But at least us 30-somethings aren't making it worse, right? Surely we wouldn't make the same mistakes as our parents and glom on to some pointless industry destined to bury us even deeper into this climate crisis. Oh, right. Holy Christ. You think it's the young people doing all that NFT stuff? It's not. I get it, we're all fucking poor, but much like the gig economy, we seem to have a real problem with finding these financial solutions designed to screw over the next generation instead of working toward broad changes in our society. And so maybe we need to own up to that and do it, because these are problems affecting everyone at every age. And so I don't know, perhaps news stories about the generation wars and so on aren't really helpful for the long-term existential goals we need to hit. Perhaps we need to start thinking as one generation of people, all trying to solve the same issues together, even if we feel like those issues don't concern us. What we super don't need is this.
And finally, new rule now that the latest climate conference is underway in Glasgow, Scotland, and Greta Thunberg has once again shown the world that she is the conscience of her generation. Someone must tell her, you may be the conscience of your generation, but you don't represent it. I really wish you did, Greta, but you don't. But I can show you who does. Greta, you have 13 million followers on Instagram, which is great. But Kylie Jenner has 279 million, which is more. But Kylie embodies and embraces a lifestyle that is pretty much the opposite of carbon neutral. And the younger generations fucking love it. When Kylie's lifestyle becomes uncool and unpopular, and you stop loving Bitcoin and stop thinking that stuffing your face is harmless, I'll take you seriously. Until then, shut the fuck up about how older generations ruin the planet. We get it. Boomers dropped the ball on the environment. We did. We dropped it like it was hot. And for that, I can only say, whoops. Yeah, you're right. We dropped it. But have you picked it up? I wish your generation was better than mine. I really do. But the sad truth is, we're completely the same.
First of all, I feel like we need a law that says Bill Maher can't talk about young women. But that's besides the point. This 7-minute monologue happened just 2 days before we shot this episode, and boy, we just had to talk about it. I'm sorry, because it's everything we're getting at. This smug-mugged galaxy brain take is that Greta Thunberg can't tell adults they're ruining the environment, and younger people can't agree with her because Kylie Jenner is more popular than her. And until people stop following Jenner on Instagram, she needs to shut the f up. And like, what an incredibly lazy, spiteful rationalization to not do anything about improving the world. What is even the logic there? That Thunberg shouldn't try because other people her age are more popular? Hey Bill, Succession has way higher ratings than Real Time. Perhaps you should not have an HBO show. Should people not make indie movies because Marvel films are more popular? Should we not give money to the homeless because the richest people in the world are greedy? Just what exactly is Bill Maher's point here? Why is the audience laughing and clapping like he's not saying complete gibberish? Oh, I actually do know why.
Cryptocurrency uses more energy than Netflix, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, and Google combined, and more than some entire nations. And yet young people could not love it more if it came with a side of avocado toast.
Because it's just the same vapid avocado toast finger-wagging trash we've been talking about this whole time. It's not witty or clever or important, but rather just the most edgelord half-assed thinking about climate change anyone could ever conjure. It's barely thinking. Like, yes, fucking of course, there is a disconnect between what we know is right and how we still instinctively gravitate towards the spoils and disease of capitalism. And yeah, this has always been true since the first shiny rock washed up on some Paleolithic shoreline. Me likey shiny things. Me wanting not to stress about food or shelter or medicine-y. But Bill takes this very basic observation and wields it as an excuse to justify complete inaction and just shitting on younger generations for also having flaws. He doesn't praise Greta Thunberg for being a model example that her generation should look up to. No, he's just mad that she rightfully called out his generation for fucking the planet and wants to drag her down to his level. Weirdly neg her into not wanting to stop climate change until fewer people follow Kylie Jenner on Instagram. This is just contrarian smugness without offering any alternative or action of any kind. And that's his solution, to just tell some kid to shut the fuck up about climate change because a bunch of people follow Kylie Jenner on Instagram? Create this zero-sum game where we sit around and wallow in cynicism until the planet lights on fire? Do you think opinions like Bill Maher's are going to be seen as historically relevant? Are we all going to recall the historic time in which a smarmy talk show host bravely proclaimed that we shouldn't do anything about anything because what's the point? Until you're perfect, keep those stones to yourself until they melt in your hand because of climate change. No, this is just the packing peanuts of observations. The vacuous trash filling the conversation like so many plastic bags in the ocean. Ignore it. Ignore anything like it. It's the useless pettiness, guilt, pride, and shame that we need to set aside in order to get anything done. So I guess my point here is, don't listen to Bill Maher, but now that I say it out loud, I realize you probably aren't listening to him to begin with, so just keep doing that. Because ignoring him and anyone stoking this dumb age war hogwash is the first action to solving all the other problems in this video. The initial step toward putting aside our selfishness, leaving our nexus of comfort, and helping Captain Picard distract Sauron long enough to sabotage his launch pad so he doesn't destroy the planet of Viridian 3. Great film, you guys. Kirk and Picard team up, old generation and new generation working together, hence the name of the film.
My administration's response to this terrorist event is a newly minted resource. I know him as Colonel James Rhodes. The American people will soon know him as the Iron Patriot.
And how is President Ellis responding? By taking the guy they call War Machine and giving him a paint job.
Okay, it's bad enough that all these villains have a point. Now I have to agree with Bill fucking Maher? And then, as a result of all that avenging, more often than not, this would create yet another villain with yet another very good point about injustice who they'd have to fight. And all while these ultra-rich, super-powered, costumed weirdos never really use their privilege to better the world between these disasters. This is Cody.
Hi, shut the f up. Did you hear?
Hear what?
Cody, shut up. Bill Maher just said the pandemic is over.
The Bill Maher? No fooling?
No fooling. It is over. It is finally over.
We did it! Yeah! Woo! But overall, that is at least one positive mindset we're getting from this pandemic. The realization that the systems we had in place, when threatened just a little bit, were almost immediately willing to risk the American people instead of change. Like, if COVID was a bear, and the government and large businesses were our spouse who chose to shove us between them and the bear, we would then have to seriously sit down and rethink that relationship. And so people are realizing more and more that things like raising the minimum wage and having universal health care should and can be demanded. Because if we actually band together, it turns out we have way more power than them, if we band together. Because the other thing we've learned from this should be evident in the fact that COVID is not even close to being over yet, despite some very loud people proclaiming otherwise.
It's just gone on too long. Nobody cares anymore. Last night, the Grubhub delivery guy was eating my French fries right in front of me. I mean, too long. I don't want to live in your paranoid world anymore, your masked paranoid world. You know, you go out, it's silly now. You know, you have to have your mask, you have to have a card, you have to have a booster, they scan your head. Like you're a cashier and I'm a bunch of bananas. I'm not bananas, you are.
So let me start by saying, I understand the reason so many people are done with COVID. Emotionally speaking, I too am done with COVID. I don't know if you realize this, but literally no one wants COVID to keep happening. This pandemic, as we mentioned earlier, was profoundly difficult on mental health. But I don't think we took enough time to really reflect on that, to reflect on the actual geography of our world changing, on businesses we enjoyed vanishing, on going to see movies or eating at restaurants becoming non-existent or at best extremely stressful, on seeing our loved ones die, and for many, on feeling this toxic resentment toward individuals who simply refuse to accept the reality of what needs to be done from day one. Hey, Bill Maher, you're over COVID now? How is that different from when you were over COVID back in March of 2020? Hey, Bill Maher, I know I've said this on the show at least one other time, but could you perhaps consider for a moment, just a tiny bit, addressing my humble request for you to 100% absolutely shut the fuck up? There's this absolutely unreal and artificial pushback we're seeing against claims of medical fascism and draconian practices, people acting like it's brave to declare that they are done with COVID, as if they live in an Orwellian world of street marching mask squads blackbagging anyone without a vaccine. But like, most large companies have already dropped mask requirements. Biden's minimal vaccine and testing mandates have been struck down by the courts. Businesses and schools are all open again. So I don't know, man. What the fuck are these people even talking about? They won in that we have decided to just Let COVID take us all. The dipshit anti-vaccine babies all got their bottle and then some. And since when did any of these dips spend so much as even a fucking day not whining about the extremely brief lockdown? The idea that we should be done with the pandemic simply because people are tired of it, coming from those who never made an effort to actually try and reduce the spread of the virus from day one, is something we need to reject wholeheartedly. Because I get it. I get why this type of message appeals to people who are just so fucking tired of the isolation and fear. But the only way to actually get out of this is to be patient, do the work, and I guess continue to hound the government for some semblance of help. Because holy sexy cow, the government gets a big ol' F on this one. Hey, wowee, whoa, another episode of Cody Comps, the name of the thing you watched. Be sure to stay tuned for more episodes of Cody Comps, where I talk for more than an hour over the span of years about a subject of a person who sucks. And you know what? Click that bell. Ding ding! For YouTube reasons. That's the internet noise. It's not. I tried. Not very hard. Thanks!